to welcome and introduce today's resource person, Madam Singda Singh. Madam is currently working as faculty at School of Law, Christ University in Bangalore. She has secured two gold medals, one for securing highest marks in post-graduation, NUSRL in Ranchi, and second medal for securing a highest marks in the specialization paper, Constitutional Law. Madam was one among the top 10 students scoring a highest marks in the graduation program. Her areas of interest are constitutional law, cooperative federalism, women and law, health law, law relating to contracts. Madam has rich experience in research. She has published and presented a number of articles in various national and international journals and conferences. Madam has also edited a number of books. To name a few, Miss Singh has published an article on revisiting federal nature of the Indian Constitution in NLUO Law Journal, presented a paper on need for acknowledgement and redressal of structural challenges in a teaching profession for a woman in the light of COVID pandemic, an Indian experience, at an eternal conference on a directions in the legal education 2020 online conference on teaching and learning in law organized by Faculty of Law, the Chinese University of Hong Kong. Presented a paper on PESA based on issues, challenges and way ahead at a national seminar on tribal rights and rights of indigenous people organized by Madhusudan Law College, Utkal University. Edited the book titled Socio-Legal Status of Unwed Mothers in India, one of the three editors brought out by the Women and Law Center by National Law University, Odisha. Madam has acted as faculty advisor for a Center for Women and Law and Center for Tribal Rights, National Law University in Odisha, and is presently a faculty advisor for Constitutional Law Committee, Teaching Learning Cell and Research, and Editorial Committee at School of Law, Christ University in Bangalore. Madam's resumes run 2 pages, but due to time constraint, I request Madam to take over. Please, Madam.
Thank you so much, Harshita, for a wonderful introduction. I will begin. Is the screen visible to everyone?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
All right. Thank you so much. So I have made it full screen before we started. So I will try and cover. I've been given 1 hour. I'll try and cover nature, features, and preamble to the Indian Constitution. I'll try to keep it as simple as possible. But if at any point in time you're unable to understand what I'm trying to communicate, please feel free to stop me because the whole point is that you understand whatever we are trying to discuss today. So before I actually begin, there are 2 questions that I had for you. We all have known and read a little bit about Constitution while we were kids in 11th, 12th, while doing our civics course. So even if you do not have formal kind of understanding of what Constitution is or what constitutional law is, I just wanted to kind of get a sense of where you are in terms of your introductory kind of knowledge on constitutional law. So in order to attempt this, it's a word cloud sort of quiz. So what you need to do is, you need to go to www.menti.com. So you have to use menti.com. This is the link I wanted to post in the chat box. However, that is disabled. So you go to menti.com and feed this code, the first one, 43, 66, 73 and 2, to answer the first question, right? So what are the salient features of Indian Constitution according to you? So you could provide in brief whatever expressions come to your mind. And for the second question, you have to repeat the operation. What information message does the preamble convey? So again, you need to log on to www.menti.com and feed the code 78387680. All right, is that clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. So I request you to kind of quickly go and respond to these two questions. If you have noted down the digit code, can I change the slide?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Thank you. So I will kind of begin with, what is the institutional understanding of the expression constitution, and what is it that the constitution entails, what is it that we understand by constitutional law, what constitutes constitutional law, what are the related ideas in relation to constitution. So to begin with, constitution is a framework, a system within which the government is carried on, right? So it has certain principles, and we have certain sort of image. Everybody understands that the Constitution is a written document. The Constitution provides for the creation of an institution of governance. It creates governments. It delegates the power. It kind of creates different kinds of institutions. So when we look at the entire text of the Constitution provides for division of power. It first creates for the organs of government. And organs of government is created at three levels, at the horizontal level. So you must have heard of the expression legislature, executive, and judiciary. So it kind of creates for division of power. But when we are talking about the horizontal division of power, we are talking about the three organs of the government, that is the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary. The Constitution also provides for vertical distribution of power, and therefore you have the concept of center and the states. Though we also have a third tier system which was introduced through 73rd and 74th Constitutional Amendments in 1992. Alright, so the vertical division of power aims at decentralization, and therefore we have a third tier added to our Constitution, which kind of creates a three-tier level of government. That is at the central level, the state level, and at the local level. And at each of the first two levels, that is at the central level and at the state level, you have horizontal separation of power in the form of three organs, and that is executive, legislature, and judiciary. The primary job of legislature is, as you know, to draft laws, to create laws. The primary job of the executive is to implement them, right? The primary job of judiciary is to adjudicate upon the matters that are brought before pursuant to the disputes that arise on account of those power exercise or everything that is contained under the Constitution. So judiciary kind of adjudicates and settles the matter. Alright, it clearly kind of puts a check on every other organ and sees to it that whatever functioning is happening, it is happening within the domain as is so prescribed under a system we refer to as Constitution. The Constitution is a framework, and therefore it's a system within which all this vertical distribution of power, horizontal distribution of power is carried on. And in order to effectively kind of oversee this process, we also have other institutional support mechanisms, and that is in the form of Election Commission, Public Service Commission, Controller and Auditor General of India, Finance Commission, and there are a few others. I have just kind of provided a few of the support mechanisms to just kind of briefly give you an idea. Now, we have talked about the idea of Constitution, and the idea of Constitution is nothing but the framework and the system, right, which kind of details everything. What are the three organs that we have at the horizontal level, at the central level, and at the state level? So if you talk about the central level, you have the parliament, right, coming up with laws. A parliament is the one that writes the law, creates the law. The executive level, the executive head formally at the center is the president. I'll come to what the real how is the real exercise of power carried on when we are discussing the salient features of the Indian Constitution. And judiciary, we have an integrated judiciary, the Supreme Court at the top. All right. At the state level, you have the state legislature drafting the laws. You have formally the executive power being vested in the governor, who kind of implements the law with the help of a system which is known as permanent civil servant service. Right. I'll again talk about that when we're talking about salient features of Indian Constitution. And then you have, again, as a part of the integrated judiciary, you have high courts overseeing the lower courts at the state level. All right. We have tried to more or less provide one high court each for every state, but that is not the case. Sometimes one high court is used by two or more states. All right. So when we are talking about now the functioning of the Constitution, we are talking about the details of the Constitution. Constitution contains provisions, and those provisions are referred to as rules of Constitution, right? So Constitution, in a sense, what is it that it comprises and what is it that it provides? It provides for composition, it prescribes powers and functions, limitations on those powers and functions for the organs of the government, the levels of the government. Some time back, I did talk about horizontal and vertical distribution of power, and that is what I'm referring to at the moment. It can, and how is it that you come to, how is it that you derive the rules of Constitution? You derive the rules of Constitution by referring to the constitutional text, right? The Constitution of India 1950 is what I'm referring to. The constitutional text contained in it provides provisions, and those provisions are referred to as rules of Constitution. Now, there are also, it could also be sourced from the laws passed by the legislature, judicial interpretation, and constitutional convention. All the rules from these are collectively together, the constitutional rules, organic rules, that is the rules made by organs of the government, in the ordinary lawmaking process, that is the legislature, and then you have judicial interpretations. And I again come to what I mean by judicial interpretations and the relevance of the same in a short while. And we have constitutional conventions. I'll again talk about relevance of constitutional conventions in some time. But all these collectively refer to as rules. Now, one may find that there is some sort of hierarchy created because, as we know, the Constitution is supreme. There is nothing above the Constitution, and everything that you have in place can be said to have sourced their power from that one single supreme document, and that is referred to as the Constitution of India. Now, we know our Constitution in India to be fairly detailed, right? It's perhaps the lengthiest constitution of the world. I say perhaps because there's chances that some of the constitution may be lengthier and the texts are divided, and I haven't really done an empirical study to conclusively determine whether the Indian Constitution is indeed the lengthiest constitution, which is why I use the word perhaps. So Indian Constitution perhaps is the lengthiest. If not the lengthiest, it is definitely one of the lengthiest constitutions around the world, and there are various reasons for it, right? So if you look across, the constitutions that you find prevalent in various countries, they are different types. People say some countries have written constitutions, some countries say they have unwritten constitutions. And an example of the same would be the one that we have in Britain. Britain is considered to be a system which follows an unwritten constitution. But don't take it literally, because when people say that, in England there is no written constitution, it is unwritten, they just mean that, the laws in place which can be referred to as constitution is not contained in one single document, right? So it can be inferred from the judicial decisions, the old charters, etc. All those are collectively referred to as the Constitution. Since it is not contained in one document, it is referred to as unwritten. So if we take the distinction between constitutions being written and unwritten on the basis of it being sourced from one particular text, in that sense, Indian Constitution is a written constitution and fairly detailed, right? So the other kind is a bifurcation, is detailed and skeletal, alright? So we have a very, very elaborate constitution, and I'll talk about the reasons of the elaborate nature of the Indian constitution again when I'm dealing with salient features of Indian constitution. But an example of a skeleton constitution would be that of USA, where the entire constitution can be summed up in around 3,000 words. So the constitution of US is not more than 3,000 words, right? It's a project for us in India. We are given to kind of write one project in 3,000 words and 3,000 words, and that imagine is the constitution of US. They had their own reasons. They were a product of their own time, and we are a product of our own time. There were specific reasons as to why our constitution was so elaborate and detailed, and we'll get to the reasons in some time. I was talking about rules that can be framed from, that can be sourced from constitution, ordinary legislations, that is the legislations or the laws made by the legislature at the central level, at the state level. There is some sort of supremacy and the hierarchy which is created, and the supremacy is accorded to, as everybody knows, we have been reading this over and over again since the time we started understanding the concept of constitution, that in Indian context, constitution is supreme. All right. So then you have at the supreme-most level, you have the constitution, then you have the rules of ordinary legislation. And whether or not the rules created by judiciary is at par or below the legislative enactment is debatable, right? Because it is the judiciary that tells you whether the law that is created by the legislature or ordinary legislation is or is not valid, or is or cannot be, allowed to kind of function, having regard to the constitutional structure. So in that sense, then you can place the judicial interpretations or rules that you can source from judiciary or judicial pronouncements at a higher pedestal. But again, that is debatable. Constitutional conventions, because they are unwritten, right, is obviously at the bottom level of all the rules that we see. And we'll see what happens if the constitutional conventions fail to be observed, and they cease to have that effect of constitutional convention. Then what happens? Which is also one of the reasons why constitutional conventions have been placed at the bottom level. I was talking about rules of ordinary laws. Rules of ordinary laws are nothing but the laws that are made by the organ whose primary objective is to create law. And that is the legislature at the central level and the state legislature at the state level. And it is supplementary in nature. So it supplements the provisions of the Constitution. An example of the same would be Part 2 of the Indian Constitution deals with provisions of citizenship. And you have Citizenship Act 1955 and then the various constitutional amendments. And Article 11 of the Indian Constitution provides that, in case there is a conflict between the Indian Constitution and provisions of Citizenship Act 1955, then Citizenship Act 1955 will prevail. Now, some of you might be confused. This is an indication that rules of ordinary legislation are in fact supplementary in nature. But some of you may be confused that on one hand, I am claiming that the Constitution is supreme, and on the other hand, I am saying that if there is a conflict between the constitutional provisions and a rule of ordinary legislation, that the rule of ordinary legislation prevails. And I would still kind of dismiss your doubt by saying that the fact that the power to override a constitutional provision is provided by the Constitution itself underlines the fact that the Constitution is supreme. So even the power to an ordinary rule or ordinary provision to overpower the constitutional provision is given by the Constitution itself. Right? Why is it required? Because obviously the Constitution cannot contain everything, and there has to be, times are changing, and therefore the requirement of rules creation will also change. The problems that we are facing today, we might not have faced at the time of 1950, and therefore we have had more than 100 amendments already in the last 70 years, even more than 70 years. To the constitution, making it as relevant today as it was before. But again, even after that, even after the constitution being supreme, it's kind of creating the framework, it's kind of creating the structure. But the finer work of filling in further details is delegated to the legislature, sometimes executive also, because that power is also delegated by the legislature to the executive. And that's the concept referred to as delegated legislation, not really required at this level. When we start discussing, or maybe when you're discussing, when you're dealing with constitutional law, you will know how it actually functions and what are the kind of flexibility given to the organs of the government. One of the other method of establishing or knowing in terms of the relevance or the hierarchy, though not very accurate ways to understand that if there is an ease of amendment. So the process why it's called ordinary also has to do with the fact that a certain kind of procedure, detailed procedure is not prescribed under the constitution to bring about an amendment to ordinary legislation. However, a specific kind of procedure is provided under Article 368 to amend at least 50% of the provisions, more than 50% of the provisions of the constitutional text. So there are two formal methods of amendments that are recognized under the Indian Constitution pursuant to Article 368. The third one, though, is given, that is simple majority, is not often it's there, but it's not, the expression has not been mentioned anywhere. So you can infer the whole idea of special majority and absolute majority if you refer to the text of Article 368. However, simple majority does not, and in that does not figure in there. In that sense, there would be no difference between those constitutional provisions that can be amended using the simple majority method and the legislative enactments, because the legislative enactments also require that simple majority method for amendment. Again, so the rules of judicial interpretation actually indicate that when there is a conflict between a constitutional law and an ordinary law, then how is it that that particular dispute or that conflict is resolved? And the higher courts, like Supreme Courts and High Courts, tell us in terms of what the law is, what the Constitution meant it to be, what is the scope of the Constitution provisions, what is the permissible functionality of flexibility that could be accorded to the ordinary laws, and whether the same is permissible within the greater or the bigger framework that is provided under the Constitution. If it is constitutionally valid, it is allowed to kind of operate as the law, as a valid law. So we understand what is a valid law, or what is correct law, or what is good law when judiciary tells us. Judiciary says what, we understand what law is when judiciary says it is. Right? To give you an example, way back in 1950 in A.K. Gopalan versus State of Madras, the Supreme Court told us that it's not the job of the judiciary to get into whether a particular procedure is fair or not, as long as it is supported through valid legislation and the legislation is valid, it is good. Whereas the position was changed by the judiciary in 1978 on the same issue, and it says that there is an inherent kind of responsibility, and the judiciary is bound to kind of see to it. And it is provided under the Constitution that the procedure that you entail through by means of a particular legislation has to be fair and has to be non-arbitrary. So in the way back in 1950, we were told what law is, because judiciary told us that we are not concerned whether it's fair or not, as long as it is valid, it is fine. In Maneka Gandhi in 1978, judiciary told us, no, it is not sufficient that it has to be valid, it has to be fair and non-arbitrary in nature. And that became the law, right? So we understand why, because the Constitution says that the ultimate guardian or the interpreter of the Constitution is the judiciary, the higher judiciary. So Supreme Court will tell us, what is meant by specific constitutional provisions and how we are supposed to kind of understand it. Sometime back I said that there is a concept of constitutional conventions. There are constitutional conventions are nothing but non-legal practices and understanding of sufficiently long origin. They have to be practiced for a very, very long time, and which is so crystallized to have presumed binding value on officers or persons exercising constitutional functions or powers. All right. So anybody who has been given a constitutional provision, if they go on observing a particular practice, that office, people holding that office for such a long time that they feel that they are constitutionally obligated, then that practice takes the form of constitutional convention. And this idea was floated by A.V. Dicey in his book, An Introduction to the Study of Law of the Constitution. It has a place in the hierarchy, but I told you it's towards the bottom. Some of the examples of constitutional conventions in Indian context would be exercise of power by the executive. So initially I told you that the formal executive power at the central level lies in the hand of the president. However, the real executive power is exercised by a group of people being elected to the legislature, referred to as Council of Ministers or Cabinet. Cabinet again is a further smaller body in the Council of Ministers, and it was an unsaid rule that every executive decision that is taken will have to be taken with on the aid and advice of Council of Ministers, right? But then there were occasions when it started being flouted and it failed to be observed as a constitutional convention, and therefore you had Article 74(1). So, 42nd Constitutional Amendment explicitly providing that now every decision, the president was bound to exercise the executive power with the aid and advice of Prime Minister along with Council of Ministers. Another example of constitutional convention would be that the finance minister is always from the Rajya Sabha, right? Another example would be in reference to Article 352, Clause 3. So whenever the President would proclaim national emergency, it would be on the advice of Prime Minister along with Council of Ministers. But however, we saw the misuse in 1975 when Indira Gandhi proclaimed internal emergency without really consulting the Council of Ministers. And therefore, the scope misuse of Article 352 was highlighted. The Constitutional Convention was flouted, and we had 44th Constitutional Amendment plugging the loophole under Article 352 by providing that now whenever the President was to proclaim emergency, it had to do it on the written advice of the Cabinet. So unless the written advice is given, the President will not proclaim national emergency. All right, another idea, another kind of component of the Constitution is also values and ideas, and these values and ideas are contained in the form of objectives in the preamble, directive principles of state policy. Though they are enforceable, they are used as interpretative aids for constitutional interpretation. All right. Before I actually proceed, all right, so I've already taken half an hour. So before I get into the idea of constitutionalism, let's look at the responses that I've received for the two questions. Were you able to respond to the questions? Can any of the students please answer? Were you able to respond to the questions in the Mentimeter? Am I audible? All right, I'm not getting any response, so I'm determining whether I'm actually audible or not. Can anybody please unmute herself?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, were you able to answer the questions? What are the salient features of the Indian Constitution?
No, ma'am.
What was the problem?
Network was not proper, ma'am.
Okay, because I haven't received any response. All right, anyway, let's continue. Can you see the screen?
Yes, ma'am.
Is there any doubt so far? Does anybody have any questions?
No, ma'am.
Okay, so this can happen on account of two reasons. One, nobody is able to understand anything. Two, perhaps because you are taking time to absorb, and maybe you will ask me questions later. So which of the two is true? Should I slow down? What is it? Is the pace okay?
Madam, the students want it to be a little bit slow.
All right.
They are not able to follow your speed.
All right. So I should go slow.
Isn't it, students?
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Yeah.
All right. So see, you have to be frank. The entire idea is for you to understand. So if you want me to slow down, please let me know. All right. So I'll go slow now. Okay. Do you
Yes,
want
ma'am.
do you want me to
Okay.
repeat anything that I've covered already?
Sorry, ma'am.
Do you want me to repeat anything that has already been covered, which you could not follow?
No, ma'am. No, ma'am.
All right.
No, continue, ma'am.
Okay. All right, so the next idea that I wanted to discuss, and this is little tricky, all right? So what is it that you understand by the expression constitutionalism? So some of you may have heard, this idea that whenever in a particular country there is a constitution, people also talk about constitutionalism, and the way people describe constitutionalism is by saying that it is opposed to arbitrariness, it is antithesis to arbitrariness, etc. People find it kind of difficult to kind of describe what constitutionalism is. No, constitutionalism as a concept is basically nothing. It's adherence to a constitutional system. So you, in a particular country, you have a constitution in place which kind of creates organs, which kind of creates systems of governance which govern in a particular country, be it at the vertical level, be it at the horizontal level. And if you stick to that particular system, the constitutional system, then more or less with other required elements, country is said to have constitutionalism. So the constitutionalism technically has a lot of implications. And one of the implications of a particular country having that system of constitutionalism is that it provides for a system where the government has limited and defined powers, right? Limited and defined powers in the sense that the government is not free to do whatever it feels like and whenever it feels like, right? There are certain limitations on the power that is given to the government in a particular country. So, whenever there is in a particular country there is constitutionalism, the constitution will provide for limited and defined governmental powers. Whatever governments that are created, their powers will be limited and defined. Alright, there are certain limitations. I will not get into the bifurcation of internal and external limitations because there is difference of opinion in terms of the extent to which it is applicable and the nature of limitations. You see constitutional in a particular country where there is prevalence of constitutionalism, there will be existence of representative government, right? It will represent people. So government in power will represent people and therefore it has representative character. There will be dispersal of power, right? So dispersal of power in the sense that I told you some time back that there is vertical distribution of power and there is horizontal distribution of power, right? So horizontal distribution of power, dispersal of constitution. For example, we have the right to equality, we have the right to kind of voice our opinion with certain limitations. We have the right we denied we cannot practice untouchability, right? So we have the right against untouchability, practice of untouchability, and these are all fundamental rights. So tomorrow the legislature cannot come up with a legislation and operate on its whim and fancy and take away any of the rights. So those limitations have been provided under the Constitution. So the Constitution provides guarantee of individual liberties and those individual liberties are provided to us in the form of fundamental rights. And fundamental rights could be right to equality, right to practice one's religion, right to life and personal liberty, right to speech, freedom of expression, and there are many others, right? So in effect, the essence or the presence of constitutionalism ensures a non-arbitrary government and a system which is responsive to the needs of the people. All right. Some of the view that constitutionalism can happen or is prevalent only in a democratic system. Okay. I have already said that the constitution in India is supreme. That means there is nobody and nothing above the constitution. We have a system of representation. We have a system of representative and responsible government. Representative because people go out there, vote, elect their own government, and the people who are elected are represented, on account of the choices that people make. A responsible government because the popularly elected house is there is a body referred to as the Council of Ministers, and that is responsible to the popularly elected house, that is the Lok Sabha. There is dispersal of power, as I told you, vertically and horizontally. There is protection of individual rights in the form of fundamental rights. The legislature possibly cannot come up with a law and take away any of the individual rights that is guaranteed to people. Right? We also have certain politically neutral zones under our system, that is judiciary, election commission, controller and auditor general, and permanent civil service. So executive, when you say that there is a law in place, who ensures that the law is observed by everybody around? So for example, there is a law on untouchability. Who is it that makes sure that it is implemented? If there is a law on, say, food security, who is it that implements that law in relation to food security? So all those, the ministers alone cannot do it. So the ministers are going to take help of civil servants. So you must have heard of the concept of a civil service examination. So we have an all India level examination where the officers in the form of for the services of Indian Administrative Service, Indian Police Service selected, and they are the echelons of the entire administrative, belong to the echelon of the entire administrative system. They help the ministers to execute the law that the legislature makes and which is okayed by the judiciary if the same is challenged. Alright, till here I hope, is this space okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
All right. So there are different features of the Indian Constitution. The Indian Constitution is considered to be a modern constitution, right? So you will say, why is it called modern? Because we have had it for more than 70 years now. But it's drafted in the mid 20th century, and if you compare it to other kind of constitutions that have had a very sort of now ancient origin, you see USA, UK, etc. What we did was we looked at the examples that we had in the form of other constitutions. We drew from different kinds of constitutions from across the world. So we took federal nature of the Indian Constitution from the Constitution of US and Canada. We took the concept of fundamental rights from USA. We borrowed the concept of parliamentary form of government from British model. We followed and borrowed the system of directive principles of state policy from Irish constitution. And since we drew from a rich fund of human experience, wisdom, heritage, and tradition in the area of governmental process in constitution is that it is a written constitution, it is very detailed, and it's a lengthy constitution. It is very, very elaborate because we have so much of diversity in India in terms of culture, in terms of language, in terms of geographical area, in terms of specific history to those areas. At the time of drafting of the Indian Constitution, there were princely states, there were British administered territories, the territories which were governed by the British. So we had to kind of incorporate all, and we had to kind of give certain concessions. The rule with respect to when Jammu and Kashmir was different. Likewise, different sort of concessions had to be given. We had tribal population. We had, people speaking different language, people following different religions. So there was a lot of variety. There was a lot of, diversity in terms of ethnicity, etc. And we had to kind of take everything together and move forward. And therefore, to provide specifically or cater to the needs of everybody, we started adding on provisions and it became very elaborate. We started borrowing from different constitutions, it became very elaborate. We wanted a document which would be relevant and something which would be reflective of the consensus of the people of India, which would be a model for people to follow. Especially in a country where we did not have any indigenous legal system which we could call on our own, and this was perhaps the first attempt. An established civil legal system to be given by the people to the people. So originally, when the Constitution was drafted, it had 395 articles arranged under 22 parts and had 8 schedules. And later on, now with so many subsequent constitutional amendments, and I said there are more than 100 amendments, now the number stands at 441 articles with 12 schedules, right? Now, already discussed why it was so detailed, lengthy, and written. It's a bag of borrowing in the sense that ideas, features, and principles have been borrowed from various constitutions. We used Government of India Act 1935 as the base to build up the constitutional provisions. We had to kind of cater to the special regions and special category of people in special situations. And we even provided conventions in writing. And I discussed few of the examples before, which was subsequently kind of some of the conventions. When I said some of the conventions in writing, I mean that we were familiar with the British model because the British kind of imposed their legal regime onto us, and there were certain things that were followed, in the form of conventions, which were provided in the form of constitutional provision in India. Again, you must have heard when you were reading initially about the Constitution of India that it is partly rigid, partly flexible, right? It is rigid in the sense that, some of the portions of the constitution require a difficult method to amend the constitution. So, for example, any kind of provision that has a bearing on the center-state relations, because we said that, vertically we have divided the power between central government and state government, and after 73rd and 74th constitutional government amendment, we have a third tier government, the third leg. And so whenever there is any kind of change, for example, we talk about GST, which was introduced. It did have a bearing on the interest of the states. So for that to come into place, or any provision, any law which takes away certain kind of rights from the states, that will require a specific difficult method of amendment, right? So we have two formal methods of amendment introduced under our constitution in the form of special majority and absolute majority. Basically, when 2/3 of the members in each of the house is present and voting, which is not less than 50% of the total membership of the house, right? It is called special majority. When that procedure is ratified by at least 50% of the states, that takes the shape of absolute majority. And I did talk about the simple majority, where anything, when you pass a particular law with a simple majority, 50 plus 1, it will be said to have passed, right? So some of the provisions under the Indian Constitution can be amended using simple majority method, whereas others can be amended using the absolute or special majority. What method of amendment has to be used where is provided under the Constitution. There are informal methods of amending the Constitution as well, right? So I talked about constitutional conventions. It was given, so originally before we had the 42nd Constitutional Amendment to Article 74, it was that, the executive decisions will be taken in the name of the president. Right? It was a constitutional convention that whenever an executive decision was taken, it has to be taken after consultation with the Prime Minister along with Council of Ministers. But what happens if the Constitution Convention is flouted? You have judiciary coming in and telling that this is the convention that has been followed and this is what you need to stick to, right? The judiciary indirectly said that what is constitutionally permissible, and that becomes the law. Or, for example, when there is a legislative, vacuum, and the provisions are very, very brief. Say, for example, the language of Article 21, right to life and personal liberty. And now you think of the rights and the Article 21 jurisprudence, that right to have access to clean drinking water, a right to sleep, and every kind of right that you can think of, right to clean environment, everything, different dimensions of Article 21 have been established to be form of or extent of Article 21. And that is said to be an informal amendment because it's not explicitly provided in writing in the constitutional text, but the judiciary has told us, the Supreme Court has told us that Article 21 would include what all. So Article 21, right to life and personal liberty, would include right to have access to clean drinking water also. So that's an informal method of amendment. I was Jennings in this sense that, because everything is provided in writing, and to amend the majority of the portions, you have to use a method that is prescribed under the Constitution. That way, Indian Constitution can be said to be rigid. The different kinds of methods and the different kind of majority that is to be used to amend the Constitution is provided under Article 368. When I say supremacy of the Indian Constitution is a salient feature of the Indian Constitution, it means that there is nothing above the Indian Constitution. Nobody is above the Constitution. Whenever there is a conflict between a Constitution provision and any other, be it legislative provision or otherwise, the Constitution will always supersede, and whenever the permission is given in the form of supplementary nature of legislation, that also is provided by the Constitution itself. Now, federal nature of Indian Constitution. Federal nature of Indian Constitution means it has origin. If I ask you today whether Indian Constitution is federal or not, most of you will say it's quasi-federal. But it's a finer understanding that Indian Constitution is actually federal in nature. You name the legal scholars around, all of them are of the opinion that Indian Constitution is federal in nature. The problem lies that there is no one approach to federalism, right? But federal in the sense that you have division of power between the center and the state, and that division of power between the center of state is provided by the Constitution itself, right? So you have duality created. There is dual polity. You have central government, you have state government. You have the power divided between the central government and the state government. You see 7th schedule and the 3 lists under 7th schedule, right? The entries are divided. That read with Article 246 will give you an indication that the power is divided between the center and the state on the basis of subject matter bifurcation, and that there is an judiciary to oversee this division of power between the center and state. Whenever center tries to overstep the boundary which is prescribed by the Constitution and tries to encroach upon the power that is given to states under the Indian Constitution, then the judiciary is going to check that advancement. So you have dual polity created. You have the division of power between center and state government. That division of power flowing from the Indian Constitution. The Constitution, because it's elaborate, it's in writing, and the procedure for amendment provided, it is rigid in nature, right? And another 2 features of the federal nature of any constitution is that the Constitution is written and the Constitution is supreme, and both these features are also provided in the Indian constitutional context. And the last one is that you have independent judiciary with the power of judicial review, and that is also available in the Indian context. And therefore we say that the federal nature of Indian Constitution is a salient feature of Indian Constitution, and it is not me telling you this. There are various landmark judicial pronouncements which have given the same opinion. For example, Keshwanand Bharti versus State of Kerala, S.R. Bomai versus Union of India. All these landmark judgments have kind of given an indication as to what would constitute the basic structure, and said that federal nature of Indian Constitution is it's a part of basic structure doctrine. Alright, I have already dealt with government with limited and defined powers. Limited and defined powers in the sense that you see we have 7th schedule with the 3 list, and you have Article 245 and 246 talking about the territorial division of power and subject matter bifurcation of power. You cannot come up with any law which abridges any of the fundamental rights, and there is a limitation imposed, right? You cannot transgress the boundary of the powers that is provided under the Indian Constitution, and therefore we said the government in India has limited and defined powers. The judiciary in India is independent. The appointment of judge can be made only on the recommendation of a collegium of judges, which is presided over by the Chief Justice of the court concerned. All the judges are to hold office during good behavior, and they can only be removed through impeachment. And terms and conditions of service of those judges cannot be varied to their disadvantage. Like, they cannot change to discomfort the judges during the term of their office. So while they are acting as judges, just because they have not given a particular decision in favor of the legislature or the executive, the government cannot turn around and change the service conditions of judges who have to disadvantage them. And then there is the concept of judicial review. So Supreme Court and High Courts have the power to go through any kind of legislative action in the form of legislation that is drafted, or an executive action to implement, if any of these is found violative of any of the constitutional provisions, then the Supreme Court has the power to kind of declare that particular legislative action or executive action as unconstitutional. Under Indian Constitution, there is no separation of power in the strict sense. Because you see, even though the judges are appointed by a collegiate system, they are referred to the executive. So the executive government does have a say in the appointment of judges. The judiciary does have a say in terms of whether a particular law is valid or not. The legislature and executive is fused in the Indian context because it is out of the legislative body that the executive body emerges. The ministers that you have in place are nothing but the ones that are chosen from the legislature. So in that sense, no separation of power in the strict sense in Indian context. We have a parliamentary form of executive because the real executive power though lies with the president, but it is to be exercised by the prime minister in reality along with council of ministers. So a nominal head is the president at the central level and the governor at the state level, but the real executive power is exercised by a group of people from the parliament, and therefore we have a parliamentary form of executive exercising the real executive power. Preamble is also considered to be a salient feature of Indian Constitution. Secular socialist nature of our state, our political system is also considered to be a salient feature of Indian Constitution. Secular in the sense that we do not associate the government or the system does not associate itself with any of the religions, and it treats all the religions at par. So it will show equal respect to Muslim religion, Hindu religion, Christian religion. Socialist in the sense that though private and public sector are allowed to operate together, right? So there is public-private partnership. Means of productions are not taken over by the government. It is allowed to be run in private hands in certain cases, but the overall procedure is overseen by the government. So we do not have a Marxist sort of socialism. We have a democratic socialism in place.
Excuse me, ma'am.
Yes.
Ma'am, are you sharing the screen, ma'am?
Yes, I have been sharing the screen. Is it not visible?
No, ma'am.
Okay, is it now visible?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, then when was it not visible? Do you want to take down notes, or do you want me to scroll back to some of the slides?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Alright, was this clear? Rigidity of the Indian Constitution?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Tell me when I can go on to the next slide.
Go on to the
ಇಲ್ಲ ಅವರಿಗೆ ಕೇಳಿದ್ರು ಅದು ಶೇರಿಂಗ್ ಸ್ಕ್ರೀನ್ ಇಸ್ ನಾಟ್ ವಿಸಿಬಲ್ ಅಂತ ಅವ್ರು ಮೋಸ್ಟ್ಲಿ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರು
Is it okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Should I change the slide?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
So I was discussing the secular and socialist nature. So the Indian Constitution is also a social document in the sense that it has a lot of goals for the Indian polity to kind of achieve. And what are those goals? Those goals, and Granville Austin, you must have heard the name, a political scientist. He was of the opinion that Indian Constitution is goal-oriented, right? We wanted to have gender parity, which is why we have affirmative action provisions. We have provisions for positive discrimination, equal pay for equal work, maternity benefits, respect for women, legislations that will be in favor of women to achieve equality. To kind of do away with untouchability, we have Article 17. So there are different kind of goals that have been given under the Indian Constitution. We want to achieve social, economic, and political justice. We want to have equality of status and of opportunity. We want to have liberty of thought expression, belief, faith, and worship. All these are there in the preamble, and these are nothing but these are the values that get reflected throughout the text of the Constitution. Can I change the slide?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
All right. So probably one of the last features or salient features of Indian Constitution, and there are too many others. I've just chosen few. All right. So rule of law is considered to be yet another feature, salient feature of Indian Constitution. The idea of rule of law was floated by A.V. Dicey, and it was in context of British Constitution. And he says that the rule of law entails three things: that absence of arbitrary power, equality before law, and individual liberty. Now you see all these three elements are present in the context of Indian Constitution. Absence of arbitrary power, because now you have Article 14, Article 21, where it ensures that the government does not exercise the powers in an arbitrary fashion. If there is some sort of check, not even substantively but even procedurally. All right, so laws that are made have to be fair and reasonable for it to survive. There are certain kind of powers, subject matter bifurcation between the center and the state. The states have been given the power to come up with laws on certain areas, whereas center has been given the power to legislate on few things. And one cannot overstep the boundary of the other, right? Into the boundary of the other, and therefore that way it's limited. The bar is limited, and therefore the scope of arbitrariness is reduced. There are certain guiding principles, and no law can be made which violates fundamental rights, and therefore arbitrary power is exercised, is checked by means of certain limitations being imposed through constitutional amendment. You have Article 14 ensuring, and then the extension of Article 14 or equality principle in the form of Articles 16, 17 and 18. 15, 16, 17 and 18. So we have equality before law. All are equal before the law, irrespective of their position in terms of class, caste, race, creed, color, sex, ethnicity, etc. Right? And individual liberty is ensured through through the whole concept of fundamental rights. Individual liberties is nothing but fundamental rights. But the rule of law, as he said, has no fixed or articulate connotation. We are inferring these three characteristics by looking at the constitutional provisions. However, exclusion of arbitrariness, lawlessness, and unreasonableness on the part of the government definitely ensures rule of law. And in Indian context, it is the rule of the Constitution and supremacy of the Constitution that we assert in the context of the law that is in place in India. Can I change the slide?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
All right.
Ma'am.
Yes? Is there any doubt?
No, ma'am.
Okay.
No, ma'am. No, ma'am.
All right. So rule of law and the law. I've just quoted a particular observation by Justice Khanna in ADM Jabalpur versus S. Shivkant Shukla. That's a 1973 judgment, right? And I'll just read it out for you to understand what he understood a rule of law to be. He said rule of law is the antithesis of arbitrariness. Rule of law is now the accepted norm of all civilized society. Everywhere it is identified with the liberty of the individual. It seeks to maintain a balance between the opposing notions of individual liberty and public order. In every state, the problem arises of reconciling human rights with the requirements of public interest. Such harmonizing can only be attained by the existence of independent courts which can hold the balance between citizens and the state and compel governments to conform to the law. Alright?
ID password ಕಳಿಸಿದ್ರೆ ನಾನು ಆ ಥರ ಲಾಗಿನ್ ಮಾಡ್ತೀನಿ ಅವಾಗ ಏನು ನಾನು
I don't think I was given 1 hour. I don't think it'll be wise for me to start with preamble because I'll anyway not be able to finish it. So maybe I'll take it up some other day if it is okay. Ma'am?
Hello. Hello, madam.
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, can we end the session because I think I'll not be able to complete preamble.
Okay, okay. Students, do you have any questions?
No, ma'am.
All right, so it's
ma'am.
all right.
Have you all understood?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Can we ask
Yes,
questions?
ma'am.
Can madam
Yes,
ask questions?
Yes, ma'am. Yes,
All
ma'am.
right. So I will do one thing. I will give out, I mean, share some reading material on the subject with your ma'am, and then maybe ma'am can forward them to you. So read those articles. You already know what is the book that you are following for constitution law.
And they have not been introduced to all that now. This is the first introductory class
Okay.
they are having.
All right. All right. So you're bound to be confused. Don't worry. Don't be overwhelmed with the information. Perhaps next time when I engage with you, I will oversimplify because I have no idea that it is the introductory session. I thought maybe you had some sort of background. But anyway, it's a very simple thing. I'll give you some reading material that you can go through. Maybe then that will help you develop your understanding. But in case you do have any doubts, I'll share my email ID also with ma'am, so you can write to me. If you want any other material, any other help with respect to the subject, I'll be happy to help. And whenever I get an opportunity to interact with you again, you do a little bit of reading, and then we can address those concerns. But for today, and if there anybody who has any doubt whatsoever, I'll be happy to address those queries.
What about any doubts, girls?
No, ma'am. No, ma'am. No, ma'am.
Okay.
No, ma'am.
Shall we end the
No,
session
ma'am.
now? Nadia?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Nadia, are you there?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Propose the formal vote of thanks.
Okay, ma'am. A very good afternoon to one and all. It gives me an immense pleasure to do vote of thanks on behalf of management, a beloved principal, Rekha Madam, staff, and my fellow friends. I thank Madam Sindha Singh for accepting our invitation to be the resource persons for today's program. Madam, the lecture was very simple and we could easily understand the basis of the Indian Constitution. Thank you, Madam, once again. I also thank my teachers and my friends. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that lovely kind of conclusion. I'm very happy to engage with all of you. And thank you, Rekha ma'am, for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you, madam. We will get back to you. In fact, our students are BCom who have passed out PUC. I should have told you that. Your lecture was very, there is a standard. And hope our students have understood the basics of Constitution. Is it so? Have you
Yes,
understood?
ma'am.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Once again, thank you, madam.
Yes, ma'am.
We will end the session.